This is a tactic which groups use to try to influence policy. Okay. And lobbying, we said, is direct lobbying is when you hire an individual to talk to a member of government on your behalf. Okay. Somebody who's like a go between. All right. Somebody who's called a lobbyist. And lobbyists are going to do a lot of different things to try to win over a member of government to your cause, to try to change policy. All right. Now, the number one weapon that any good lobbyist has is what? Information. Having accurate information that you can use to persuade somebody. All right. Now, a lot of people will be like, Mr. Scalise, how do we know that like a lobbyist isn't like lying or manipulating or telling a just an outright falsehood? And why would a lobbyist not do that? Why do they have incentive to tell the truth and not lie? It impacts their credibility. And what's connected to their credibility? The person they're lobbying for and their paycheck. Okay. And so if you're a lobbyist, you present good, honest information because you know that like there's financial incentive for you to do that. And some of these lobbyists are actually individuals who like the causes they represent. So they have an interest in seeing that for themselves. So, maybe Elena goes into environmental lobbying because she's like, I believe the environment's important. Yes, my paycheck comes from this and it's a good paycheck, but at the same time, I also believe in the cause, so I'm not going to lie. All right, I'm going to use information to win people over. Now, do lobbyists sometimes do shady things or blur the lines about what's moral or even legal? Absolutely. But those people tend to be the exception and not the rule. Okay. Most lobbyists are good, honest, hardworking people who are trying to represent their clients. All right. But they have a bad reputation because they are allowed to do some things. Now, let's talk about the people who make up lobbyists. One of the unique things about lobbyists or the lobbying industry is something we call the revolving door. Okay. The revolving door is the cyclical movement of government workers to the lobbying field. Right? It's the cyclical movement of from government workers to the lobbying field. Right? Check this out over here. Members of Congress, for example, 42% of members in the House, 50% of senators will become lobbyists after they leave their job as a member of Congress. So, like, if you look at the lineup of people who were elected to Congress this year, out of 535 people, you can bank on half of them spending time as a lobbyist. Right? Why would people who were members of the House or the Senate, why would they make good lobbyists? They know how the system works for starters. They know the important players, okay? And they have the second thing that makes them valuable, they have connections to these people. All right? There are people that I can call, like within the education system, that would probably talk to me, but they perhaps would not give the time of day to some regular Joe Schmo. The same way that certain people in government will answer the phone when it's Joe Manchin calling, but when it's Don Scalise calling, they're like, "Who's that guy?" All right. So you know the system, how the system works. Two, you have the connections, and what's something else that a member of Congress has that people in the general public don't? What is it? You're on the right track. Not even reputation, because you can always check out somebody's reputation. Right? Remember, what do you need in order to persuade people? Information. Okay? If you're a member of Congress, you probably have access to information the general public does not, including all those other lobbyists. It gives you a leg up. All right? That makes them valuable individuals. Now, there's a lot of other skill sets that transfer from like being a congressman. For example, you got to be a good communicator. You have to know how to talk to people, and you don't get elected to public office without being able to connect to people typically. All right. And if you're going to be a lobbyist, you have to be somewhat likable too. All right. If me and Collins are both lobbyists and she's a very likable person, and I'm not a likable person, and we still both have good information, somebody's still going to maybe connect with her better because she's likable. Sometimes it really pays just to be somebody who's pleasant to be around. All right. So you see, members of Congress are going to go from Here, they go out the door as government, leaving government official jobs, and then they come right back in the door, the revolving door, as a lobbyist. Oh, lovely. All right. Now, something else that's important. You see over here on the left of this graphic, politicians who become lobbyists get a 1,400% pay raise. Right? If you're a member of Congress, you make about $175,000 a year, which to us seems like that's a lot of money. Okay. But here's the thing, when you're a lobbyist and you've been a member of Congress, you can command a seven-figure salary. All right. Anybody, you guys might not remember him. You remember a guy named Nick Rahall who represented this district? He was literally a congressman for the 3rd District in West Virginia for almost 40 years. He won 19 straight elections, 38 years in Congress. That's pretty spectacular. When he finally lost in 2016, people were like, oh, poor Nick Rahall. Believe me, Nick Rahall was not like poor Nick Rahall. Poor Nick Rahall went and became a lobbyist and went from 175,000 a year to over $1 million a year. All right, he was drying his eyes with some $100 bills. All right, he liked serving. He legitimately liked serving, and he felt like he was doing good for West Virginia. And so he's like, hey, you know what? I'm not done. I still got other options. And so he went and became a lobbyist and makes a crap ton more money. He made more in 1 year than he did in the 9 previous years as a member of Congress. Right? And believe me, people wanted him to come work for them. Yes. Oh, look, Tima asked a good question. She was talking about members of Congress and do they like trade votes? Like, hey, you vote for my bill and I'll vote for yours. And we'll get into that in detail when we talk about Congress. But yes, they do that. It's called log rolling. They have a name for it too. All right. And sometimes you trade favors. Okay. Something else about lobbyists. If you go to Washington, D.C., they have streets with the letters as the street names. And if you go to K Street, that's where most of the lobbying firms are. And you see that it shows you their background. Some people, and you can see a good chunk of lobbyists get in here with no government experience at all right? And then you got some people who have previous government experience. They weren't a member of Congress, but they've worked for government. Sometimes lobbying firms, like let's say that Kaiser worked at the Environmental Protection Agency, which they get to determine the rules about pollutants that go into the air, the water, the ground. And she knows all the ins and outs. And my lobbying firm wants to hire her because we work with a lot of environmental groups and we want to know all the right people to talk to at the EPA. So you might have had some type of government experience, or maybe you work at the State Department and you know everything about American diplomacy overseas. All right. So it's not just members of Congress that we want. Okay. Now you could take these people who have no government experience and teach them, and they can learn and immerse themselves in it. But it helps if you have some experience already. Plus, you're going to get a higher salary. And then there's this upper crust here, the former members of Congress. Those individuals are the ones who get the highest salaries because they tend to be the ones who are the best at their job, right? Those individuals will make a lot of money. Now, lobbying, okay? There's some problems with lobbying here too. We'll get to that influence peddling term later, but right now we want to talk about this. There are limitations about what a lobbyist can do, okay? Because there's the possibility for corruption, right? So here's how this could potentially work, right? One of the things that lobbyists do, you can give gifts to people. You can give them gifts, but there's a dollar limit on the amount of gifts that you can buy for somebody. So they're limited in that way. Okay. Back in the days before limitations, I'd be like, hey, Mia, I've got this nice Rolex here, and I'm just going to set it down on your desk and let you admire it. And sometimes I just get up and walk away and completely forget things. You know what I'm saying? You read me? Okay. All right. Now, right off the top of my head, I can't. I want to say it's something like $100, which still like you can buy somebody a nice little gift or what have you, and you can even take them out to lunch. So for example, let's say that Connor is a member of Congress. I'm like, Connor, hey, let's have lunch today on me. We'll go to this new restaurant in Washington D.C. I've got reservations there. Why don't you come be my guest and let's talk about this bill? He's not going to change his vote based on lunch, me buying him lunch. But it gives me an opportunity to talk to him because he's a really busy guy. And he's like, Squeeze, I don't have time today. I'm like, man, everybody's got to eat. And he's like, well, I guess that's true. Yeah, and it's a free lunch. And you're like, "Hey, I'm not gonna turn that down. What's the harm in just talking to him?" All right. And some people are very persuasive and they might win you over. Or at the very least, if I'm a lobbyist and I get to have lunch with Connor, uh, at the very end of lunch, maybe he's still not convinced. And he's like, Scalise, I'm just not, there's nothing you could say. I'm like, hey, you know what? That's okay. Maybe we could work together in the future. And at least now he knows my name. And maybe he realizes that I'm a nice guy. I'm not going to try to get anything past him or do anything underhanded or sneaky. And I have a good reputation. So you never see it as a lost effort. Okay. So there's limits on what you can buy in terms of like meals for people and little gifts. Okay. Second thing that's a limitation on there, all lobbyists have to be registered with the federal government. You must be registered with the federal government. It's about 11 or 12,000 lobbyists that are registered with the federal government. Right? That way, if Connor's a member of the United States Senate and somebody says, I'm a lobbyist for so and so, well, we can look him up and check out information on him to make sure that he does have the credentials he claims to and that he indeed represents certain groups. Okay? Now, one other thing that's a regulation too, if you are just leaving a government job, like let's say I finished my term as a member of the United States House and I want to be a lobbyist, there's a 1 year gap that says you can't be a lobbyist from 1 year to the end of your employment to 1 year later. That way, what's happened to all your inside information by that point? It's not relevant anymore. Now, a lot of people, and even at the beginning of the Trump administration, he claimed he wanted to expand that time frame to like 5 years. Right? By the way, how do you think lobbyists felt about that, or government? They're like, no, 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 don't do that. All right, we don't want to see that happen. You're going to deprive us of some of our best talent. Okay, and sometimes too, it's not like you don't want like as a lobbyist. Sometimes government experience is useful. Let's say that over here that Peyton worked as Connor's chief of staff. She was in charge of his office, made sure everybody did their jobs, did a lot of talking to other staff members of other people's offices, and helped work out deals and provide strategy. She's useful to us as well. She would be a great lobbyist because she has access to people that others don't. All right. And that's what lobbying firms are looking for. What can you bring to the table? What can you add to our group? Who can you connect with to help us win more influence? All right. Now, even though there's limitations on lobbying, there are some problems with it where one lobbyist, even who's very influential, can be corrupting. And that's what happened. I'm going to show you a video that's going to be, I'm going to put it in your folder if you want to watch it later too, but we're going to watch it here. It's about a guy named Jack Abramoff. And in the late 90s, early 2000s, Jack Abramoff was a guy who had, you'll see him in this video, he describes having strong influence in more than 100 members of Congress. And that's pretty influential to be able to say you have strong influence in 20% of Congress. All right. And you're going to see how he corrupts the system and gets himself in a boatload of trouble that's going to land him in prison. All right. So we're going to watch that video now.